different issues. Well, no, the same issues, like the whole morning, climate change, but from a political angle. And I'm not going to tell you what are the consequences of climate change. It has been made clear to you during a number of the previous sessions. What do we know? It is man-made. It is global. It's the most global problem we have. It is cumulative. All new emissions of greenhouse gases add to the problem. But the problem is the result of the accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution. And that means, number 4, that industrial countries, rich, wealthy countries, have a greater responsibility than other countries. And that's a problem, because the other countries are more vulnerable, because they are less wealthy. And they do not have enough resources to absorb the consequences of climate change. So it is urgent. And it goes without saying, this is a problem which requires world cooperation. Did we cooperate? What did we do? A little bit of history. 1992, climate treaty. All countries promised to do their very best to stem climate change, to do their very best. It was based on a voluntary approach. 5 years later, Kyoto. Countries, it's a miracle, said to each other, we don't trust ourselves. Because if we have just to rely on our own, we will be certainly not keeping that commitment. So we need a treaty. We need a binding approach on the basis of international law with clear, quantifiable targets to decrease greenhouse gas emissions. And we need sanctions on non-compliance. That was quite a step forward. And then we started to negotiate, and it took a number of years. And after long negotiations, I'm not going to bother you with the history, we did agree. And after the agreement, there was ratification. And after the ratifications, it took a number of years because we needed quite a number of countries to ratify, and the US had made clear that they were not interested in ratification. We finally got it operational. And then the whole issue was, because it was a first phase on the basis of international law, until 2012, talks about a second phase with deeper cuts in greenhouse gas emissions. As a matter of fact, the countries who did ratify more or less were able to meet the commitments. You can question some individual countries, but on the whole, more or less, the commitments were made. However, there was no second phase. Kyoto ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. Nobody's talking about it anymore. Why? Was it due to the financial crisis of 2007? It did play a role, but not much, because as a matter of fact, the financial crisis implied lower growth and lower emissions. Was it due to the fact that people felt that this was not anymore an urgent problem? No, because there were many people all around the world who really were saying this is urgent still. I think it was due to 2 factors. The US stayed outside. They did not ratify, and we were hoping that at a certain moment there would be a new democratic government, because the first negotiations were taking place while Clinton was still the president. But when Obama came, he completely forgot to adhere to multilateral agreements. He was sitting somewhere in a back room together with the Chinese and everybody else could talk, but we take the decision. So it was a kind of a betrayal. And the second factor was lobbying. Lobbying by private industry, by big oil, big gas, big mining companies, big finance, all those industries which needed fossil fuels in order to continue to produce. What have we learned since then? 3 points. Firstly, the emissions are increasing, in particular now because also there is economic growth in Asia and in Africa. And there will be. And I'm very pleased that there will be economic growth, bringing many poor people into middle-class people. We want exactly the same lifestyle as people in the US, in Europe, Japan, etc. And those 1.5 billion new people will add to emissions. That's number one. Number two, we know that the consequences will be larger than we thought at the time. And many of these consequences have been laid out this morning. And some of those consequences will also imply conflict, violence, war, migration, because there is no possibility for people anymore to live on a number of areas in the world. And number three, we also know, let's face it has not been said here today, but the market will not solve the problem. The market is the problem. So where are we now? We have Paris. And the leaders have said, this is great. Well, I tell you, Paris is not a step forward, it is a step backward. Because there is just, again, like between 1992 and 1997, a treaty based on good intentions. We are doing our best. We make promises, but there is no binding law and there are no sanctions. There's only one obligation, to make a national plan, all countries, and to send it to Paris transparently, to share the plans. And all countries have done so, nearly all. And if you read all those plans, then you see that the outcome of those plans will be emissions leading to an increase in the temperature with more than 2 degrees, which was already a compromise, but it will be over 3, and that is a catastrophe. Paris is a step backwards. Even worse, it still has to be ratified. 55 countries together responsible for 55% of the emissions, which again requires the US, more or less 35%. Then you have already quite some. If the US will not ratify, then it's going to be very difficult. Because if the US will not ratify, what about China? What about Russia? There is quite a chance. It has to be done before the elections. If we get President Trump, we are certain that there will not be a ratification. Yes? You only have in this country a couple of months left. So we are in a difficult situation. What can we do? And firstly, 7 points. Study, study, study. Inform yourself in order day after day to be able to confront the half-truth and the misinformation of those people who still deny that there is climate change. To confront also the misinformation and the statements by companies and others who have a commercial or shareholders' interest in ongoing climate change. Those who want to continue to drill. Those who want to expand mining further and further in risky situations in the Arctic, in the ocean, in landscapes which are being considered as somewhere far away where people are living over there. Number 2, choose a credible lifestyle yourself in terms of material consumption, based on quality rather than quantity. step back in terms of material economic growth. Consider a level of living, average, more or less adequate, like your grandparents did have, somewhere in the 1960s, based on a smaller amount of energy, fossil fuel. And do so in such a way that in particular poor people in your own country still have the possibility to increase their own level of living. More equality within countries is a conditio sine qua non for more equality and sustainability abroad. Number 3, put pressure on governments. Compel them to ratify. Compel them to take climate change serious as an issue first priority. And climate change is more than climate change. It is also water. It is also soil. Compel them to keep their commitments if Paris is going to be ratified. Campaign for senators, mayors, presidents who take this issue serious. Make this a major issue in your own political activity just as a citizen. Hold your elected politicians and leaders accountable. Go to court together if they do not keep their promises. And there are groups in civil society who really go to court and are able to compel their own government to change laws because their government was not interested in keeping international laws. There are possibilities of people. Number 4, keep the same pressure also on companies. Hold them also accountable for the emissions and also for their activities, for further drilling, further mining, and for the way in which they are spending their money lobbying on power, on politicians, on members of parliament, on the administration to allow them to continue their own activities. Hold them accountable and be active. Become shareholders maybe of a big company. Organize yourself as shareholders and speak out as a shareholder against the policy of the company. Number 5, plead for enough international money, more aid to countries, for instance, or based on international taxation options, in order to make it possible for countries with a huge poor population to make a jump directly to renewable energy. Like in Africa, countries do have directly mobile phones rather than traditional phone connections. You can make that jump also in energy, but you need a lot of money and a lot of capacity building, and that has to be paid for. It has to be paid for by those countries who have an energy debt to the poor countries in the world. You have a great possibility on the basis of the SDGs. The SDGs was a miracle last year that they were accepted on 17 different fields. You can translate all these SDGs in national activities to reform. And reform is necessary. For the first time, the United Nations had a declaration with a title. It always was declaration or agenda. Now it has a title. And the presidents came together and committed themselves under the title, Transforming Our World, which means transformation. Which means not only in the interest of our own world, our own country, no, of the world as a whole. Keep them at their words. And finally, we are living in a world which has become a global market. That's a fact. You cannot change that anymore. Accept that. Make use of it. Globalize the international civil society. Work together with young people, and they are there, in China, in Russia, in India. Create a kind of a global civil society as a countervailing power to transform political decisions. Thank you.